In September of 2013, the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency was the recipient of an EPA Brownfield cleanup grant to assist with environmental remediation of the agency's property that's located at the corner of 6th and Jackson, also addressed as 217-317 West 6th Street within the city of Moscow. The agency had acquired that property in 2010, recognizing that as a critical keystone development site for the future development of Legacy Crossing. And shortly after acquisition of the property, began a couple-year time period of environmental assessments that were completed on the property. The environmental remediation of the site is now complete, and the report this evening is our final project closeout report upon the project and an opportunity for any public comment that may be received. If you look at the downtown area back in the 60s, you certainly can tell, and this is 6th Street here. This is Main. Used to be 95 College coming through here, and Jackson. There was a fair amount of heavy industrial activity happening in the south end of Main, focused on the railroad corridor that came through that portion of the community. Specifically with regard to the agency's property here located at the southwest corner of the 6th and Jackson intersection, there was a company located here, I think it was Pure Grow. You can see the logo here on the corner of the building, and you can kind of see some storage tanks there back in the corner. As you look in the aerial photograph, then in the late 60s and through the 70s, that property, the URA property is outlined in yellow on the map, was utilized for the storage and distribution of ag chemicals to support agricultural industries within the region. And specifically, what we found was a lot of fertilizers, and those made their way into the soils and into the groundwater underneath the site. As I mentioned, multiple assessments were completed prior to 2013. There was an assessment that was completed, or at least a phase one that was completed when the agency acquired the property in 2010. At that point in time, the city and the agency had received the Brownfield Coalition Assessment Grant, and so that grant was utilized to conduct a couple additional assessments on the property by Tetra Tech and then following up with Terragraphics. Those early assessments up into about late 2013 primarily focused on pesticides on the property, specifically DDT and Dieldrin that was utilized, and that was what was thought to be the primary element that needed to be remediated upon the property. That was a very different remediation in that is a very shallow soil contaminant that was probably in the top 6 inches of soil on the site that would have to be removed and disposed of at a proper licensed facility. So at the time that the agency made the application for the cleanup grant, that was the scope of work that was identified, was to address Dieldrin and DDT on the property. However, shortly after that time, that the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality expressed that there was a concern that nutrients had not been adequately addressed or assessed, and that additional assessment work was completed in late 2014 into early 2015. And at that point in time, nutrients became the contaminant of concern on the property, and the pesticides were no longer viewed as being a human health risk. In 2015, then, Terragraphics completed the final assessment, and the ABCO, as we call it, which is the assessment of brownfield cleanup alternatives, where you take a look at a site, you look at the contaminants that exist on the property, you look at alternatives for remediating and treating it, you look at the human health risk that it presents and the anticipated future use of the property, and you essentially chart the path to remediation of the property. At that point in time, in the August 2015 ABCA, the additional risk modeling was conducted on the pesticides and was determined that that was no longer a human health risk on the site. And as I mentioned, the remediation focused upon nutrients and specifically ammonia and nitrates that were present in the soils and the groundwater at higher concentrations. In addition, if it was just going to be contained on the site, the primary concern was the potential for off-site migration. The nutrients are not specifically a human health risk per se, depending upon how you control the exposure path. And the primary concern was drinking of groundwater that was underneath the site, and this is in the very shallow groundwater. I want to clarify it's between 8 and 15 feet below the ground surface. It's not connected directly to the city's drinking water supply that is, in some instances, several hundred to thousands of feet below several hundred to maybe 1,300 or 1,400 feet below the ground surface. But the primary concern was off-site migration. While the agency could place a covenant on its property to preclude any type of well development or water utilization on its property, it couldn't control it on off-site, and thus we began on the remediation effort on the property. The recommended remediation that was included in the APCA included a combination of removal of some of the highest concentrations of contaminated soils on the site, and taking those soils and land applying them in agricultural areas, since they are just fertilizers that would be utilized and the plants would uptake the nutrients. And then groundwater treatment and containment with some extraction wells will be placed on the down gradient edge of the agency's property. So this is a map of the site indicating number of borings and monitoring wells. These were 3 extraction wells, 4 injection wells, and the 2 locations in the soil borings that identified higher concentration of nutrients were really kind of the north-central part of the property, and some here in the southwest corner of the property. The overall groundwater gradient flows to the northwest on the site, and so the remediation work that was prescribed in the APCA was removal of these higher concentrations of soils and land applying those on an approved site. The installation of 3 extraction wells on the down gradient side of the property to try to contain any contaminated groundwater on site. That water is collected with small pumps and then discharged to the sanitary sewer system for treatment at the wastewater treatment plant. And then there were 4 injection wells that were installed in order to inject a kind of dilute lactate solution that helps speed up microbial breakdowns of the nutrients below the ground surface. So these are a couple pictures of the excavation depths on the site, and the 2 removal locations went down between 11 and 12 feet in total depth to remove the most impacted soils on the site. So there are those 2 locations. This is the north central location, and then this is the location in the southwest corner of the property. Those were then backfilled with structural fill, compacted to support future development on the site. And then the extraction wells, piping, power system, and discharge systems were installed following the removal of the soil. We broke down the work really in what we call Phase 1 and Phase 2 because there were somewhat different specialties. Phase 1 included the soil removal, and we had about 1,150 cubic yards of soil material that was removed from the site, and the establishment of the sanitary sewer connection for the groundwater treatment system. That was completed by October of 2015. And then in November of 2015, we completed the construction phase of Phase 2, which was the design and installation of the groundwater treatment system, and that was completed, as I mentioned, in November. In January 16, we completed the first of 3, what were to be 3 injection treatment events on the site. And in March 2016, we did our second injection, and then again our final injection in the fall of 16. At the same time, we did some pump upgrades that were requested of the agency by the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. These are just some nitrate concentrations. So these are 2 different wells. The orange line is MW3, the yellow line is MW6, and this is the drinking water standard. So you can see that the concentrations were fairly elevated, and then by about February of this year, MW6 was down below the drinking water standard, and MW3 was quickly approaching it. So this was evidence that the treatment and the removal of source and the injections were having the intended effect on the groundwater concentrations. So that was good to see. As we reach the closeout of the project, there are really several elements, the first of which was an environmental covenant that's recorded against the property. That covenant prohibits any groundwater extraction upon the agency's property or any future owner. Also documents the engineering control obligation. So those are those 3 extraction wells until we reach compliance here with MW3 here at the edge of the property. We need to continue to operate those extraction wells to divert that water and to ensure that it does not move off-site. So our environmental covenant places that obligation against the agency until we're relieved. We also have a operations and maintenance plan that goes along with those compliance requirements, and then a financial guarantee and an escrow account that the city is acting as the escrow holder to ensure that there are money set aside for the continued operation of that extraction system. Following the filing of the environmental covenant against the property, then DEQ issued a certificate of completion that documents the completion of the VCP program, the voluntary cleanup program that the agency had entered into with the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, and then documents the obligations that were referenced in the environmental covenant. And then the final stage was receipt of a covenant not to sue. This is a commitment from the state that will take no legal action against the agency or any future landowner with regard to the environmental contamination that was addressed through this process. And the agency received that document in March of this year. So we are completed through that process. Project costs overall for the remediation. Early on in the process, the EPA had encouraged staff members to attend a Brownfield conference for additional training. So I believe Jeff and Elisa attended that event, so there was roughly $3,500 in cost attending that activity. The Phase 1 of the construction work, the soil removal, sanitary sewer connection, was $67,958 for that phase of the project. And Phase 2 for the groundwater treatment design, construction, and injection events, and pump upgrades and other activities, capture modeling and other things we've done over the course of the groundwater treatment phase has totaled $110,918 so far. So total project cost to date, and these should be finalized. We received our last invoice. We paid that last invoice, and we were done with the project. Totaled $182,346, not including the assessment work that was largely done through the Coalition Brownfield Assessment Grant. I think there was about $110,000 of environmental assessment work that was completed underneath that grant that's not part of the cleanup grant activity that covered the construction. EPA grant reimbursement that we've received, in addition to a pending reimbursement that we expect to see shortly, is $168,646. Underneath the grant obligation grant contract, the agency, the Moscow Urban Renewal Agency, had a required cash match of $13,700 and in-kind match of $11,005 in total in the project. So the agency is happy to be successfully completed with our remediation effort, and it's been helpful, very helpful to have the assistance of the EPA Brownfield Cleanup Grant, and we look forward to advancing the property to redevelopment with the selected developer of the property being Sangria Downtown LLC. And with that, I would welcome any city council or public comments.
We've came a long ways over the last 50 or 60 years, Bill. I remember as a kid in high school, this is back in the 60s, and I had a friend, his dad had the Shell bulk plant for gas and diesel. And I'd ride with him to go around and pump gas. Shell stations. Well, the biggest concern back then, about half the people in America smoked cigarettes, and the biggest thing they worried about was somebody throwing a live cigarette out anywhere close to one of these bulk plants because of the diesel and gas spill on the dirt. I can remember that just vividly. You know, these huge no smoking signs around that. So we've came a long ways from what it used to be, thank God. So that's a good, excellent report. Questions for Bill?
No, I just have to tell you, when I first got on council, and all the department heads were going through this, you were like, don't ask any questions, I'm just going to go through this whole thing. And you just, because there was so much. So I'm really happy that it's been so long, that it's been so tedious and all the things. So anyway, congratulations.
It's a great process, and we can be proud of it, you know, is how I see it. So, other questions for Bill before we